This is a video class to cover two important topics. We're going to talk about ademption and abatement. There are corresponding PowerPoint slides, 3 to be exact. So before we talk about ademption and abatement, we are first going to discuss classification of gifts. Now, classification of gifts from a theoretical perspective is actually a rather complicated topic. We could spend an entire class period easily going through all the different variations and permutations related to classification of gifts. And we obviously are not going to do that. You need to know and understand classification of gifts to the extent that it is relevant to the two topics that we are covering in this tape of ademption and abatement. First, let me talk to you about specific gifts. What is a specific gift of property? A specific gift of property is a particular item of property in decedent's estate, distinct from all other items of property or all other assets in decedent's estate. The question is whether or not decedent intended donee to have a specific thing that decedent owned, and just that one thing. So to provide you with an example, I give Blackacre to A. Provided that decedent owned a piece of property called Blackacre, that would be a specific gift of property. I give my 3-carat diamond ring to my sister Catherine. That also is a specific gift of property, provided that decedent owns a 3-carat diamond ring at the time of death. I give all of my land in San Diego County to the beneficiary. That also is a specific gift of property, so long as the decedent owned property in San Diego County at the time of his death. Now, let's compare the notion of specific gift to a general gift. What is a general gift of property? A general gift is a gift of general economic benefit that is payable out of the general assets of the estate. The beneficiary is not entitled to any particular or specific item of property within the estate. So by way of example, I give $10,000 to A. If there is not $10,000 cash in the estate at time of death, any general items of property in the estate would have to be sold to transform assets into cash and to give that money to A. Another example, a 3-carat ring to my sister Catherine, and decedent has never owned a 3-carat diamond ring. In that circumstance, the executor would go out and purchase a 3-carat diamond ring for Catherine, and that would be considered a general gift of property. 1,000 acres in San Diego County to X. If decedent has never owned property in San Diego County, that is a general gift. The executor would go out and purchase 1,000 acres in San Diego County and give the 1,000 acres to the beneficiary. So we have specific gifts, we have general gifts, and next we have residuary gifts, which I'm not going to spend any time on right now because we have discussed residuary clauses ad infinitum during the semester, and a residuary gift is a gift of property made pursuant to the residuary clause in the estate. So let's move on to talk about ademption and abatement. Now, I can tell you for final exam purposes that there are three doctrines that all begin with the letter A: advancement, ademption, abatement. We seem to have, on the final exam, a fair amount of confusion with regard to these three doctrines. It is very important that you know and understand the difference and not make this mistake. Start out by saying advancement is only ever applicable in intestacy. You will never discuss the issue of advancement outside of the context of intestacy. Ademption, to ademe, means, as a verb, means to fail. And in fact, ademption is relevant when a specific gift of property is not in the estate at time of death, and the legal issue is whether or not that gift has failed. So looking at the first PowerPoint, a gift is addeemed or it fails if it is not in the estate at the time of testator's death. This was the rule at common law, and in fact it was a bit of a cruel rule because it does not pay any deference to the intention of the testator. If the specific item of property was not in the estate at time of death, boom, it failed. Today, we take a little bit of a different approach to ademption. First, though, before you do an ademption analysis, you want to classify the gifts in the estate. Ademption, as a legal theory, only applies to specific gifts of property. So you would not talk about ademption with a residuary gift. You also would not talk about ademption with a general gift. We only look at ademption with regard to specific gifts of property. If a gift, a specific gift, is in the estate at time of death, we're good. Ademption is not an issue. The problem is when a specific gift of property is made under an estate plan and it is not in the estate at time of death. Our general rule is going to be dependent on the intent of the testator. As a general rule, absent any type of evidence to the contrary, if an asset is not in the estate at time of death, we assume that the beneficiary is not entitled to the proceeds from the sale of the item or from insurance if the item was in fact insured. We look at intent as of the time that the testator disposed of the item. If the testator voluntarily sold an item, then in fact it is addeemed. So to provide you with an example, testator devises Blackacre to A. This is a specific gift of property. Testator did own Blackacre during testator's life, and then following the execution of the estate plan, testator sells Blackacre for $1 million cash. At the time of testator's death, is this $1 million in cash payable to A? And the answer is no. The $1 million of cash is not payable to A if testator voluntarily sold the property during life. We look at testator's intent not at the time the will is executed, but at the time the property was sold. And if this was a voluntary sale, the sale proceeds do not go to beneficiary A. It is a little bit different if a conservator was appointed because the testator was incapacitated. If a conservator was appointed because of the incapacity of the testator, then the beneficiary is entitled to the sale proceeds when the conservator sells the item of property. Similarly speaking, an asset that was disposed of involuntarily would be any asset that was destroyed accidentally. For example, testator dies in a car accident in his very expensive sports car, and he has specifically gifted that sports car through his estate plan. In that circumstance, when the crash and the destruction of the vehicle is also what killed the testator, clearly testator did not intend to voluntarily dispose of the assets. The beneficiary would be entitled to the insurance proceeds that would be payable because of the destruction of the vehicle. And that is Ademption. I can tell you, if on an exam you see a testator die in a car accident and the car is a specific gift of property through the estate plan, it is worth discussing the insurance proceeds and the fact that they are not deemed. Similarly, if testator dies in a house fire, we know the house is insured. Who is entitled to the insurance proceeds from the destruction of the house? That would be covered by Ademption. Let's talk now about abatement. Abatement is covered in the second PowerPoint. Abatement is the process of reducing gifts to the beneficiaries under the will. When is abatement relevant? It is relevant when the estate is not big enough to pay all of the debts of the estate as well as all of the gifts. We know that someone's interest under the estate plan has to be abated or reduced. Every state has an order by which gifts are reduced when there's insufficient assets in the estate. This is particularly relevant in practice when we go through a recession. We go through a recession and the value of decedent's estate has substantially reduced. The decedent may or may not have revised his or her estate plan to accommodate the substantial reduction in assets. And so we look to abatement and to the state statute to reduce someone. So how do we go about doing this? The statute in Nebraska is 30-24,100, and it is in your supplement. Our first step with abatement is classifying gifts. Well, actually, that's not true. Our first step with abatement is looking to the language of the will. Sometimes estate planners explicitly include abatement language or an order of abatement in the terms of the will. And if it is specified, then the provision of the will govern. That is sort of our first step in this process. If there is no provision in the will, that is when we look to the statute, which in Nebraska, as I said, is 30-24,100. Now, the abatement statute is different in every state. The provisions of the abatement statute, as a general rule of thumb, like intestacy, are intended to reflect or carry out the intention of the average testator. The question is really, what gifts would the testator want to be axed out first? And so we will go through as a first step and classify all of the gifts. The abatement statute runs class by class through the gifts. First, we use anti-intestate property. That is what we get rid of first. So we have the first class, which is intestacy. We go through and we reduce all of the gifts in that class. So we go through and we reduce all of the intestate property on a pro rata basis. And so if there is $1 million in intestate property and we only need to come up with $500,000 to cover the deficiency, we would reduce any beneficiaries taking intestate property by 50%. We cover the deficiency. We do not need to proceed any further. I can tell you that most, if not all, professionally drafted estate plans contain residuary clauses, and so there will be no intestate property. The next class that we reduce or wipe out is residuary gifts. We go first through intestate property, then residuary gifts, and if our deficiency is covered, we do not proceed any further. If our deficiency is not covered, we then move to the next classification, which is general gifts. We would do a pro rata reduction on general gifts. If we do not have enough money to cover the deficiency in the category of general gifts, we then move up to reduce specific gifts. When we cover our deficiency, we stop. So if we cover our deficiency with residuary gifts, we do not proceed up to general gifts. And if we cover our deficiency with general gifts, there is no need to move up and wipe out any specific gifts. There is within each category a pro rata reduction. And so if we need 75% of the value of the general gift category, then each beneficiary on that category would be reduced by 75% of what they were supposed to receive. To give you an example, if A and B are each supposed to receive $100 apiece, and we need $150 of the general gift category to cover our deficiency, then A and B will each be left with only taking $25 apiece of what they were originally supposed to receive, and there is no need to wipe out or reduce specific gifts in that circumstance because we've covered our deficiency with $150 of the $200 general gift category. Now, one little nuance that is relevant here, there are some states that add an extra layer to the statute. So your statute in Nebraska is intestacy, residuary gift, general gift, specific gift. In some states, the general rule of order is intestacy, residuary gifts, general gifts to non-relatives, then general gifts to relatives, then specific gifts to non-relatives, and specific gifts to relatives. So in some states, the categories are broken down into two more categories, and the general gifts to non-relatives will be wiped out before general gifts to relatives, and the specific gifts to non-relatives will be wiped out before specific gifts to relatives. And that concludes our coverage of abatement and ademption.